Hello, everyone, and welcome. Just as I was getting ready to go live, an earthquake hits Morgan Hill. That was kind of interesting. I hope that's not a bad omen. Um, Welcome to it, everyone. We're doing another live stream as we do every month on the third um, Saturday of every month to cover some of the latest real estate news and information relating to our local markets. Enjoy a cup of coffee, answer your questions if you have any. One of the things I'm absolutely going to discuss this month is going to be inflation. There have been some interesting articles out there relating to inflation, and the usual suspects really oversell the advantages of real estate in a world of inflation. I think I don't get me wrong. I think that real estate is a good choice in an inflationary period for a few reasons, but not the ones that the headlines talk about, not the ones that tell you, your home is going to be worth more, those kinds of things. It will be sort of, as we understand that the dollars that we have are worth less than they were yesterday in inflation, right? Um, as your dollar can buy you less. We've talked about inflation a lot on this on my podcast and also on Coffee and Real Estate about how it's sort of the invisible tax, right? It's they print more money, which makes the money in your pocket worth a little less. So we're going to talk about that. I've got some numbers to share with you. And as usual, we've got the monthly summary numbers where we'll look back and see how things are performing in Morgan Hill, San Jose, and Santa Clara County in general, just so you can get a good perspective, sort of a 10,000 foot view of what the numbers are doing. An interesting thing for those of you who follow me on Instagram, you know that I made a big deal about how we had finally exceeded the number of homes listed in February, and we did it very early. We did it. We were halfway through the month, and we were at 71 new listings. And I'm going to look into it to try to figure that out. But as I was running the numbers again this morning, that dropped back down from what I think the peak we hit was 73. And now it's down to like 65, which is less than what we had the same time last year. So I don't know if those were listings that were canceled within the same month. I'm not seeing that. But if we have time at the end, we can even do that research together if you really want to. As always, the chat is up in Facebook Live, so feel free to chime in with any questions you might have about any specific local area. We can get into the nitty gritty on different things as local as you want. I like to try to give you as much information as possible relating to just sort of the broader things that might affect you in our local markets. So we'll go ahead and jump into that. Let's go ahead and move on over and take a look at the numbers. This is not where we want to start. Let's go ahead and start with the specific numbers for February. And we'll see where we're at compared to the same time last year. Now, as always, these are numbers that are slices of time, right? It's just February, comparing it to the exact same month a year ago so that we eliminate any of those seasonal influence things that can throw numbers off. This is a particularly interesting way to look at it right now because there is kind of a seasonal influence even when we look at February, right? Because the way we were living with COVID a year ago is very different from the way we were living with COVID today and compared to 2 years ago, right? And it blows my mind that we're talking about COVID in terms of 2 years ago. And of course, the other reason we're here is for some good coffee. This morning, I am enjoying a mocha that I made with my fabulous new Gaggia Classic Pro espresso machine. I finally broke down and got myself what's, I guess, considered to be sort of an entry level espresso machine rather than the disposable ones that you tend to get. Am I tasting a difference? Well, yeah, oddly enough, I really am tasting a difference, but also the other ones just stopped working. So we'll see how that goes. In terms of my coffee life, I realize that a lot of people get really focused on coffee and get right down to nitty gritty and crazy details. Salinas. Hi, Martha. We can absolutely talk about Salinas. Salinas is one that I don't know if you've watched previous Coffee and Real Estates. I actually went down to Salinas last year, looked at a ton of homes in Salinas, and also did a couple of podcasts about Salinas. I like Salinas. But man, have prices gone up in Salinas, and we can absolutely take a look at that. Let's go ahead and hit the big stuff, or the big stuff, the more local stuff, the slightly north of you stuff, before we jump into Salinas. But I'd be happy to do that. All right, so let's go ahead and take a look at total active listings. These are the homes that were available entirely in February, right? The entire suite of homes, everything buyers had to choose from. In Santa Clara County, we had 819 homes, which is down almost 42% from the same time last year. San Jose had 383. And that, when we look at, I mean, these are insane numbers. 383 total homes in the entire city of San Jose. Well, thank you, Martha. I appreciate you joining me for the first time. But absolutely, I want to talk to you about Salinas. I've considered moving to Salinas. I like Salinas that much. But anyway, so let's jump back in. San Jose down 40%. Morgan Hill down 50% with only 30 homes totally active during the month. In terms of new listings, in Santa Clara County, we had a decline of 2.5% for a total of 1,601 homes in Santa Clara County. In San Jose, California, obviously California, 811 homes total in inventory in February for a decline of 3.5% from the same time last year. Morgan Hill, 65 new listings. Now, this is the number I was talking about. I really wanted to beat that 66 number from last year, and we did in mid-February. But then they magically disappeared. At first, we got up to 73. Then it dropped down to 71, and that was the last time I checked, which was about... That must have been February 1st or 2nd I checked. And now it's gone down even more. It's dropped at least 5 since the last time I looked for a decline of 1.5%. But we're very much on par. Remember, Morgan Hill is a smaller market, so little fluctuation shouldn't be taken as huge trends, right? It's not like we're Santa Clara County where we're talking about thousands and thousands of homes. Total number of homes sold, 898 homes sold in Santa Clara County in that month in February, down 13.3%. San Jose down 16% for 460 homes sold. Morgan Hill down 24.2% with a total of 25 homes sold. And don't take this decline as an indication of a lack of buyers. There's tons and tons of buyers. It's totally an inventory problem. It's not any other problem. The bottom line is tons more homes would have sold. I mean, just look at the total active listings number. It's insane. So if we'd had more homes, we'd have sold more homes. Now, the average list price. And for you, Martha, since this is your first time watching, I do average list price a little bit differently than most people report it. I do it off of original list price, meaning, let's say, Martha, you wanted to sell your house in Salinas, and a real estate agent came into your living room and convinced you that of all the details, right? Here's what we're going to sell it for. Here's how we're going to market it, etc. And you signed on with that person. This average list price reflects the average that someone saw on that document when they signed the listing agreement. So if you agreed to sell your house for $1 million, and the day you signed the listing agreement, that was the number, that's what this represents. This represents what it was originally listed for, or it should. It's the number that first went into the MLS. So if a decision is made down the road to change the list price, right, to reduce it because you're not selling, or to increase it because it's for whatever reason you're increasing it, maybe you had an offer and then that buyer fell through for some reason and you put it back on the market for more than you had it listed before. Those kinds of changes aren't represented in this. And the reason I report it that way is I want you to think of this number as the seller expectation number, right? When you signed that listing agreement, you had an expectation of this is what my home will sell for at least, right? Based on what your agent told you, based on what numbers they presented, based on your personal research, whatever, this is what you were calibrated to. So this gives us an idea of what sellers are thinking. And in Santa Clara County, sellers were thinking they should get 13.2% more for their home this month in February than the same time last year. In San Jose, and that's at $1.75 million, which is bonkers to me. I mean, we're creeping up on $2 million on the average list price. And when we get to what homes actually sold for, it's just as crazy. San Jose, $1.4 million. That's nearly a 16% increase in the same time last year. Morgan Hill, nearly 1.4 million, right in the same ballpark, but an 18.6% increase in the same time last year. Average sales price, and this is what the home actually sold for, was up 16.5% in Santa Clara County from the same month a year ago at 1.725 million. That number is just nuts. To think that is the average just blows me away. I don't know how people are managing to deal with it. 28.3% increase in San Jose for 1.46 million. In Morgan Hill, 1.429 million for a 21.8% increase from the same time last year. This number tells us how much over or under asking price homes are selling for. And you'll see that in Santa Clara County, folks are tending to get 13.7% above asking price. In San Jose, folks are tending to get 14.7% over asking price. In Morgan Hill, folks are tending to get 6.8% over asking price. And the reason why this is an interesting number is also if you dovetail it with seller expectations, right? How much have sellers' expectations increased over that year? Well, we'll see that the expectations in Morgan Hill, right? Biggest increase in expectations on the part of sellers when they listed their home. So that when you calculate that in and understand that sellers in Morgan Hill, because of that, are likely initially pricing their homes higher than what other communities are estimating, right? Because other communities are thinking, well, I should only get 16% more or 13% more. So when you see that 1.66, don't think, oh, well, people aren't buying. I mean, it's still almost 7% over asking price. But the reason why I think we don't see double digits is I simply think that folks in Morgan Hill, sellers in Morgan Hill, are initially offering their homes at a higher price on average than other communities when compared to past prices in that same market. Does that make sense? I hope it does. I feel like I just confused things. But that's why I think that number is a little smaller than the other two. Next, days on market. So again, this is a number we report because I think it's an important number to keep in mind. But right now, it is a completely artificial number. It is not something you need to. The reason the number is what it is because that's what sellers and listing agents decided it would be. If we made a law that said every real estate agent must accept offers immediately upon putting it on the MLS, right? In other words, I put a home on the MLS on Monday. The law says I have to start accepting offers on that Monday. The odds are homes would sell in 24 to 48 hours. Offers are coming immediately. Even in a market where real estate agents are saying, listen, we're putting this home on the market. We will not consider offers for 2 weeks is the typical line. Anywhere from a week to 2 weeks is the typical timeline. So that's a reflection of just how crazy the inventory is right now. We have far more buyers than we do sellers. We'll see how interest rates affect it, as now we're up to 4% plus, and we'll see how that impacts. Now let's go ahead and take a look at over time tracking. Now this is looking right over our shoulder. We're not just comparing to the same time last month. This is us looking at what's going on with the market in the months that have passed, and are we at a point where things are pivoting or changing at all? Now you can see, let me just make sure of something here. I just realized that sometime this particular, see, it did it to me again. Those numbers didn't look right. Let me just go ahead and change that real quick so that those numbers are reflected. There we go. All right. Apologies. Quick detour there. All right. So as you can see, the trend we saw last month in January is continuing in February, where let's make sure you can see what these are listed at. So new listings have gone up, which is normal for this time of year, right? If we look at January in past years, normally we start to see the new listings numbers go up. For homes sold, we're seeing another rise, and we're also seeing total active listings going up, all expected. Days on market is relatively flat. We're going all the way back now to this is the COVID curve right here that happens, where everything just goes crazy. In terms of Santa Clara County, list price versus sales price, no real crazy bits of wisdom to be taken from that. We already really kind of discussed that, and we're really just in that ballpark of seeing what percentage folks are getting above the asking price and what the prices are, just hovering at these insanely high 1.7 million kind of numbers. And then, of course, there's percent of asking price. Now, in terms of Morgan Hill, we're seeing a little bit of a different story. We see that the total new listings is up from last month, which is nice. Not up from the same time last year, but up from last month. but we're seeing a decrease in the total number of active listings. But we also saw a decrease in the number of homes sold, which is odd. Again, a factor of inventory. But I think what's happened is we've had perhaps a lot of new listings at the end of the month that just simply haven't sold. Maybe a boost. And I'm not real sure how that affects the other part of that dynamic where we were talking about beating the number of homes listed compared to the same time last year. But right now, that is an interesting number I want to keep an eye on. Why are we not seeing an increased number of active listings? Now, that the one explanation there would be a sell-off of homes as they come in, which we kind of saw in the last month's numbers. But this is also a dramatic drop in homes sold, which makes me think maybe this will iron itself out come the next month, right? See new homes that are listed that have listed within the last couple of weeks of February that are scheduled to close in March, and then maybe we'll see this normalize. But I found that interesting that we saw so many new listings, and yet these didn't sort of go in line with what we saw as it related to Santa Clara County in general. These are better numbers to trust in terms of deriving trends, right? Because Santa Clara County is a thousands of homes market, and Morgan Hill is a dozens of homes market, right? So smaller numbers tends to be a little bit more volatile, right? One home of millions, tens of millions of dollars will obviously offset average price. One home that's been on the market for 100 days is going to offset days on market. So these can be a little bit more volatile. So it's better to look at these as somewhat of a guide, but then when we get these better numbers, I think that's a smarter way to go in terms of larger numbers, larger sample size. Okay. Now, before we move on from this particular screen, I have one other thing I wanted to mention. There's been an awful lot of talk about inflation, and I wanted to try to square a couple of things away because the headlines don't really jive with the... let me zoom this in a little bit more, just so I can be sure y'all can see it. It looks like it's pretty squared away there, but let's go ahead and go up to 200. Okay. All right. So let's take a look at what this is real quick. The headlines have been that real estate is a great hedge for inflation. And it is, but it's not a hedge for inflation in the way that everyone seems to be wanting to sell it, which is it's great for your home's price, right? Well, what I've done here is I've taken all of the data from 1970 to 1984 for both inflation and for home price trends, right? And we don't care about the amounts. The amounts don't matter. What we're looking for is the trend. And if you look at the beginning of the 70s, leading up to 1972, home prices were sort of on an upward trend. Inflation kicks in 1972, and what's the response of real estate? Average home price goes down. Okay, that is not data that supports the headlines that tell us that inflation increases the value of your home, right? Just look at that for a second. The purple line is average home price in the United States. The blue line is inflation. Each one of those colored bars is a month of the year. Does this segment of time tell you that inflation increases your home's value, what you're going to get for your home? No, it doesn't. It says the opposite. Because as soon, almost to the day, that inflation starts to go up, in this particular scenario in the mid-70s, home average prices went down. And then when inflation started to decline, right, home prices started to rise. And then we started to see an increasing rise that continued to rise when inflation rose, right? But then once inflation gets to a certain point, it starts to drop again. So what's my point? My point is, if you're buying a piece of real estate during inflation, thinking that in the near term that home is going to be worth more in actual dollars, meaning if I bought it for $1 million today, it'll be worth $1 million a year from now, that is not probably correct, right? Of course, there are scenarios where that ended up being true, right? When you were at high inflation here in 1974, if you waited till 1978, obviously you were going to make money. But that was because home prices were artificially low at that point, right? Um, the point here is there are other reasons why real estate is a good investment during inflation. One is if and the reason I'm focusing on this is the most recent historical example of crazy inflation in the United States, where we were talking about double-digit inflation. Now these numbers over here are the percent inflation. So 11% inflation, over 13% inflation. That's what this represents. And it was under the circumstances closest to what we experience today, right? So it made sense to try to compare these two things. So why do I say it doesn't help you on this, but it's still a good hedge against inflation? Well, think about it. If you have money that you have borrowed to buy a house and you're paying it back every single month and inflation is high, that dollar that you're using to pay off your home is worth a little bit less than it was when you bought your house, right? That's what inflation does. It makes each dollar you have worth a little bit less. Now, if you bought a home with a fixed interest rate loan, meaning your housing costs are not going to go up, aside from taxes, aside from insurance and maintenance and those kinds of things, just paying for that roof over your head isn't going to increase in cost, right? My mortgage, I have a fixed rate mortgage on my house. Let's say that mortgage is $1,000 a month. That is never going to go up, even though the value of each individual dollar I'm using to pay that is going down. In other words, I buy a gallon of milk today for $1. Inflation goes up. I now am paying $2 for that gallon of milk. That same dynamic does not affect your house if you bought it with a fixed rate mortgage. Does that make sense? That's why it's a great hedge against inflation. If you're a renter, you have been hit over the head with insane increases in rent, and that's just going to keep going. So I wanted to show this to everyone, and if anyone starts coming at you with the whole inflation is great for home values, it's not. And you just take a screenshot of that, print it out, fold it up, put it in your purse or your wallet, and go, this is what actually happens. Because also think about something else. Remember, if a dollar is worth $1 in 1972, right? And then we see inflation that goes crazy, that dollar is now worth 25 cents in 1974 in terms of buying power, right? So if your dollar was worth $1 when you bought your house here, and now your dollar is worth 25 cents here, not only have you seen an actual decrease in what your home will sell for, say from $1 million, let's say down here it's let's say it's $800,000, but each one of those dollars is also worth less than it was. So in real numbers, you've actually lost more value in the property in terms of cash than what your sales price even reflects, right? Because of inflation. All right. So I hope that makes sense. I hope I didn't just confuse the heck out of everything. Let me take a second here, and I'm going to go to my big ugly face full screen here for a second while I see if I can't take a look at Salinas for Martha. Let's go ahead and look at it. That's not what I want to look at. I want to look at this. I apologize for going full screen on me, but there's the tool I have to use to check out a market has stuff in it that I'm not supposed to share. It's double secret agent stuff, I guess, for real estate agents. But let's look at Salinas. And once I get into the screen, I think I can go to it. And I will let you tell me what you're most interested in. Okay. We're going to go to the stats page. Okay, here. All right, so here we are. What I would like, Martha, is what are you most interested in? Are you thinking of this from a I want to buy in Salinas? Are you thinking of it from a I want to sell in Salinas? Or are you thinking I want to invest in Salinas? Let's go ahead and just start with average sales price. Um, we can do like over the last year. So we can do from January 2021 to February of 2022. We can do list price, average sales price, whatever you want. I am happy to do. We'll do sales price. We'll group it by month. We'll go. Okay, so looking to buy. All right, so the average sales price is probably still a good thing. And let's. Whoops, I didn't want you to do that. Let's go ahead and do Salinas. Jeez, what is wrong with me? I'm going to blame the thing. So I'm going to go ahead and look for residential, single family, condo, and townhouse. All right. So let's see what's been happening. Now, from my experience, we're going to see pretty much what I've been expecting to see. The average price increasing. Now, I don't know if you are very familiar with Salinas. There are parts of Salinas I like a little bit more than other parts of Salinas. I'm a big fan of southwestern Salinas, so sort of the main downtown, and then homes just south of that and east. Actually, that whole southern area is super nice. And then there are other areas sort of on the southwest end that are also nice. A lot of beautiful homes actually scattered all through. But here's what we got. This is the average sales price in Salinas. Let's see how much that is in terms of actual dollars here and just look at the data. So the average in 2022 was 870,000, up from 604,000 in 2021, and that reflects almost directly what I've been seeing. I have a regular search. Yes, this is being live streamed, and then it'll also be available for replay for anyone else after it's over. So these are all the numbers for Salinas, residential, single family, condominium, and townhomes. And you can see how much it's gone up. I mean, it's a pretty big jump. And I have a search that I have running for myself for Salinas that does what I like to call the everybody wants it house, right? The 3-bedroom, 2-bath home, which is kind of what everybody's interested in. And over the course of and I've been looking now for, I can't even remember when I went to Salinas. I mean, I've been to Salinas obviously recently, but the last time I went and sort of did a video on it and then did some Instagram stuff on it, I think was it 2020 or 2021? But it was a day where I did all the outlying areas. So I did Salinas, I did Tracy, I did a bunch of places just outside of normal commute ranges based on this idea that more people would migrate out of downtowns like San Jose, since they can now work from home so much, and see how much that affects these different markets. But yeah, from the same time last year, nearly a $200,000 jump in the average price of a home. We can also do, let's see. So what's the typical home you'd be looking for? Would you be a 3-bedroom, 2-bath person in Salinas? I realize there's a delay, so I apologize. I'll go ahead and have a little coffee. Just to get us started, let's go ahead and look at a 3-bed, 2-bath in Salinas. And instead of using my magical tool, I'm going to use realtor.com and hope it doesn't. Geez, I can't even type. Not enough coffee. So one thing, a 4-bed. Okay. So even a little larger. Man, I tell you, everything slows down so much on my browsers when I'm streaming. I think it takes my computer a little extra effort to make all this stuff work at the same time. Okay, so here we are in Salinas. And we can also include the map view, which I'm sure the fact that I've done that will slow this down to no end. And do you have a preference for what kind of home you'd be looking for? I mean, are you mostly interested in single family residential, or are you okay with townhomes and condominiums? I don't remember seeing many condominiums actually when I was down there, but let's go ahead and just start with what we know, which is 4 beds and 2 baths. And I'm going to assume you're not interested in mobile homes. We can have a chat uh, about why I'm not a fan of mobile homes. I'm a fan of owning mobile home parks if you want to do it as an investment. Not a fan of mobile home parks for you to live in unless the park is owned by the residents or you own the dirt that your mobile home is on. Too many horror stories. I've been in real estate a very long time, and I still remember those poor folks over in Santa Cruz County who had the land for their mobile homes sold out from under them to a developer, and folks who paid hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars for that ocean view from their mobile home suddenly didn't have any place to put their mobile homes where it would cost more to they couldn't sell it for anything. I mean, it would cost literally no one would buy them, and it would cost them money to get them off the land. So it was horrible, terrible. And I remember someone in the real estate office I was with at the time had just helped someone buy one literally 2 months before all this went down. Used her life savings. Horrible. It just makes you want to cry. All right, so there we go. There's what we're seeing with no limitation on price for 4 bedrooms and 2 baths in Salinas. And like I said, I am a fan of all this part of town. All this part of town. There's also some nice areas up around here. I was a little bit less in love with this part of town. I don't remember why. I think it was there seemed to be a lot of deferred maintenance in some of the neighborhoods. Not real sure what was up with that. But as you can see, the prices range down here, and unfortunately, obviously, the area I like is a little more pricey. But you can see 1.2 million, 1.6, 1.2, 824,000. Do you want to put a price limit on this to get a feel for what would be a limiting factor? If you've got a ballpark idea, and if you're looking to buy, Martha, the first thing you're going to want to do is get pre-approved for a loan. It's not a commitment. It's not you saying, I'm going to borrow this money from you. It's not you saying, I'm going to buy a house in the next month. It's just you getting pre-approved for a loan. And think of a loan as anything else you'd buy, if you'd buy like a car or anything else. Okay, so let's put 800K in there. All right. So if you have a bank you work with now, ask them for a pre-approval. If you have a credit union near you, go in there and get one from them. If you have a loan broker near you, go to them. Don't go to just one bank. You could go to like some big name bank like a Wells Fargo, but you could also go to the equivalent of whatever the big local bank is in Salinas Building and Loan, whatever, right? You want to do a smaller bank as well. And just they're going to have different terms and conditions, and you want to compare those. But these would be your options. So we've got one sort of in the area I've historically have been more fond of, but also in these other areas. This is good. What do these guys look like? Do you have a preference on, oh, that's pending. Let's see if we can't not show pending. Let's see how many disappear with that change. Look at that. Look at that. That should, if you have any questions about what's going on with the real estate market, look what just happened. Let's remove hide pending and see how many we have. Look at that. That should tell you what's happening with inventory right now. Look at all the options you had. Now, once we put in just loading, hiding, pending, and contingent. And that means they've accepted an offer and it's at some stage, right? Contingent means that this buyer still has things they need to sign off on. Pending typically means, agents aren't always real good at doing this right. But anyway, once it's pending, that means everything's been signed off on. If anyone tries to get out of the deal at that point, someone loses money, right? Normally the buyer. Um, but wow, that is mind blowing. Let's watch that disappear again and just watch them all go poof. So all we have, so those were all available recent. They're within the last 30 days, right? Because in order for it to be pending or contingent and not closed means it's in escrow. So these are all properties that are still in escrow and not sold yet. So odds are these are all homes that sold in the last 30 days or less. Oh man. Yeah, and so all we have are the two newest, and I seem to recall there was also another new one down here that's gone. It was new and still sold in short term. But here we've got one at $699. I'm pretty familiar. Yeah, yeah. So here's my problem. There are a ton, and I don't know if this will be something you care about. There are a ton of homes, and I think this is what I didn't like in this area. A lot of single car garages, and I'm a two car garage kind of guy. My thing is, I want to have enough room for a car and also to do other stuff like hobby stuff. Like every once in a while, I like to see if I can still build a piece of furniture, that kind of thing. So I like to have a little bit of a workshop. So that's kind of me. So I'm not a big fan of the single car garage. This is obviously an older property. Yeah, which isn't a bad thing. And here we go. Here's a single story, 740. I don't know where you fall in terms of like what stage of life you're in. And I know there's some folks who really don't want stairs in their life anymore. So obviously this would be one that would be a good one for that. I like that wide driveway. I like that. That's a nice little layout. I'm going to go ahead and put a little heart next to that because I love it so much. Anything else I can help you out with on Salinas? Oh, it wants me to log in. Maybe some other time. Yeah, I'm a fan of Salinas. I think that Salinas is a great community. I'm a fan of where it is. It cools off dramatically in Salinas. People don't realize how close it is to Monterey. I guess they just don't think of those two things at the same time. But Salinas is just a little bit east of Monterey, and you get through this little valley right here. As soon as this map populates, you get a great little breeze. A lot of the times that I was there, there's a nice little valley thing that kind of happens here. So you get this great breeze that comes through, and it really cools it off. And in the morning, you can get the fog. I love it. It's a great town. Now, these other red dots are properties that meet your criteria that we put in there. So 4 beds, 2 baths, not more than 800K. So I don't know how you feel about Marina. Marina's a community I like. So yeah, that's there's absolutely room to do it. And I'm finding that new homes are being built. But here's the problem. We'll have to see where they are on price point. Usually you're paying a little bit of a increased price on new construction, to the point where there are now, it costs so much to build new homes. You used to, back in the olden days, right? Back when I first got into real estate, I started in 1988, so early 90s, typically brand new construction, you were going to pay about, I don't remember what the exact number was, but in my head, I'm thinking it was about 10%. There was about a 10% increase in price there. But so much of what it costs to build new properties or build new homes these days has been sort of stacked on. And we had an awful lot of new fees and whatnot stacked onto the process with the last big upturn in real estate that resulted in the 2007 downturn. All of those fees got put on there, but they never got removed. Right? Of course not, right? Everybody in government wanted to take advantage of this housing boom by adding all these new costs and fees and other types of things on construction, but then they never got rid of them, right? You would hope that they would be smart enough to get rid of all that stuff to encourage new construction, but they didn't. So all of those fees and costs still exist, and the only way builders typically can recoup that and still make an acceptable profit is to build higher end homes. But we are seeing a bit of a dip in higher end homes right now. So I think that's encouraging builders, if they want to sell off their stock, they need to go a little bit more reasonable on their pricing. So we'll see how that plays out in Salinas. But where I was going to is, instead of paying, say, 10%, a 10% increase on new construction, now it's like 15 to 20%. So it's unpleasant for folks who have to try and buy a home. Not always true if something bad happens, right? We had a ton of new homes that had been built just as things crashed in Morgan Hill. And we had some areas where the builders really slashed their prices because they had to, just like everyone else did. But yeah, I'm not sure where that new construction is. Let's look that up. I have a tool. Let's see here. New home source. Let's see what's going on in Salinas, Martha. Since you're here and you're taking an interest, let's go ahead and look. Salinas, California area. Let's see. I'm not going to put anything in for price. I just want to get an idea of what they're charging. And you want 4 beds, or maybe we don't want to do that yet. Maybe we want to just look at what is being built in Salinas first. All right, so here we go. Oh, all of them, none of them are actually, at least on this tool. So they're talking Soledad and Seaside. But look at Seaside. $2 million. That's insane. The property taxes alone. That's just nuts. That's $20,000 a year in property taxes. Vintage Estates and Soledad seems to be the big one here. All within your price range, but only one model that's got the 4 beds that you want. At $638,000, which actually is really good. Which I don't know how that compares to other things in Soledad. We could go back to this, and where is Soledad? I mean, Soledad's way down here, right? So let's do a side by side comparison, right? For the 4-bedroom thing that we thought sounded fun, right? We are talking $640K. Let's just round it up to $640K. If we look now at other things that met your requirements in Soledad, and this is what comes up when I do a new home search in Salinas. It gives me all the way down here. Let's go ahead and look at Soledad and see. Now, I've driven this drive, and there's an awful lot going on there in terms of it does add, I think that's a limiter, right? If you work in Silicon Valley, I think that's a bridge too far. If I worked in Salinas, for what I'm getting in Salinas, I think I'm okay with that commute. I mean, that's still a long commute. It's like an hour and something, right? To not need, unless you're going to maybe Sunnyvale or Redwood City, of course. But see, look at the difference. So little cheaper here for Soledad, for something else that meets your exact same criteria. This is a little more, and this is a lot more. Yeah, yeah. And it's you're saying it's 30 minutes from Salinas? Yeah, that would seem reasonable. But if we look at this one, that looks like yeah, I mean, that looks reasonable, and it's an open house today if you want to go take a look at it. What else have we got? The other one, that one looks okay too. It looks like a relatively newer build. Then there's this one. What's going on with this one? 6 beds. Okay, that's why it's a... And this one was 4 beds, 2.5 baths. And remember, okay, so 2,000 square feet for $687, 1,500 square feet, and the other ones were 2,500 square feet. So not horrible. I think you're still paying a little bit of a boost, but you're not paying the 15 to 20% that I've been seeing. So not terrible in terms of looking at a new home. And I'll tell you what, there's a lot less stress buying a new home. You're not going to be dealing with the whole, there's 27 offers on this house, right? You just get there, you sign the papers, And if you're the first one there, then you get it. I'm finding folks on new home purchases that are buying where the home that they want isn't going to be isn't going to be done for as much as a year. So be ready for that. And a lot of folks see that as okay. I had one person, this would be a year and a half ago, who was buying a brand spanking new house in downtown San Jose. Got into contract, said, I'm going to buy it. A year goes by, and it's ready for them to move in, and it's worth, well, you know what it's worth. It's worth a couple of $100,000 more than what they agreed to pay for it. He was seriously considered selling it until he was thinking about, well, where do I move? I still have to stay in San Jose. Where do I move if I don't do this, right? So he ended up staying in it, but he's happily living with way more equity than anyone else, or at least most others, particularly who bought so recently. All right. So what else have we got? If there's anything else about Salinas you'd like to look into, I would be happy to do that for you. Otherwise, I've got a few more little tidbits kind of that dovetail into the inflation thing, worrying about inflation, and explanations for why home values don't go up, right, when inflation goes up. It's because everything costs more. But everything costs more except your house, as I mentioned before, if you've already got the fixed financing going on. But as inflation happens, all your other stuff gets more expensive, right? Your gas gets more expensive. For those of you who are filling your tanks to the tune of $7 a gallon, you know what I'm talking about. But here's another one. So, that's the wrong article. Apologies. Here we go. Rising heating bills. If your heating bill goes up from 5 to 50% in the wintertime, but you're not getting a 5 to 50% raise in your pay, well, where does that money come from? Right? As all these other things in your life get more expensive, if you've budgeted and you've only been managing to save or have extra at the end of the month, anything, right? The average American doesn't. The average American overspends what they get in pay, right? So I remember, I think it was last data I saw on this was, the average income went up, let's say up 1%, but then average spending went up 2% or 1.8%, something like that, right? So on the average, the folks who make up the bulk of the population don't tend to save a lot of money at the end of every month. So if your $100 a month heating or electrical bill goes from $100 to $150, where does that extra $50 come from? Now multiply that by everything else, because remember, if gas is $7 a gallon, everything you buy at the supermarket is going to go up, right? Because the delivery costs go up, and the delivery costs get passed on to the store that's buying the goods, and the store that's buying the goods still has to pay all their employees, so they need to raise their prices, right? So when do you think house prices will start to go down? I don't know, Martha. I love looking into the crystal ball. I've been doing a podcast. I'm not trying to pitch you on my podcast, but I've been doing a podcast since January of 2007. And over the years, I have considered myself almost a genie when it comes to peering into the crystal ball. I was definitely in there. I didn't start it, obviously, until we were right in the downturn in 2007, in January 2007. But I feel like during that time, I really was able to read the tea leaves. Prior to the podcast, I was telling my clients not to overspend, not to borrow the max they can. I feel like I was a force for good in preventing people from getting into a really bad situation. I had some clients take my advice. I had some clients not take my advice, who then contacted me later and said, I wish I'd taken your advice. But I feel like I've been pretty good. But we have so much crazy stuff in the mix, just balls in the air right now. I do not know. Will they come down? The same pressures that make prices come down are in play right now as any other time when they've gone down, right? Insane. People hate using the word bubble, but this is a bubble. Nothing inflates this fast and this much without creating a bubble, to the point where at some point people cannot buy. I mean, it's nuts what people are expected to pay. We just covered, you're creeping up on $2 million in San Jose for a house. That's nuts on average for the average priced home. So does it have to come down? I think one of two things has to happen. Either has to come down, meaning that homes that are worth $1 million today are worth $800,000 in some near term, or values have to stagnate for a certain period of time, at the very least for incomes to catch up. But that also implies that incomes continue to increase, right? Um, so I think at the very least we see a slowing. We don't see double-digit increases in home values over the course of the year, to the point where we've seen last month or the month before we had what, a 20% increase on average in Santa Clara County from one year to the next in home prices. Obviously, that's not sustainable. You can't do that. Nobody's income is increasing by 20%, so it's unsustainable, right? So when do I think things will start to go? It really depends on what happens with inflation. Inflation is in a lot of ways artificially created. It's created by the politicians that decide to print more money. When they print more money, inflation goes up. But they're trying to now pull back. They're trying to buy some debt, meaning get rid of, you print money to create treasure notes and different things. Pull those back, right? And the other thing that they can do to adjust inflation is to increase the lending rate, the prime rate, not the lending rate, the prime rate. Those are opposites. So if you increase the prime rate, you decrease inflation. If you decrease the prime rate, you increase inflation, right? That's supposed to be the relationship between those two things. And we just saw an increase in the prime rate, but I don't think nearly enough to deal with the level of inflation that we have. Inflation is supposed to be at 7.9%, right about 8%. But if we calculated it the same way that we did back in the 70s and 80s, like those numbers I showed you earlier, it'd be over 10%. And some of the guys I listen to, like Peter Schiff, who's an economist who frequently goes and talks about various things and who warned everyone about the last downturn in real estate and was correct and got laughed at for telling everyone that the downturn was going to come in 2006 and 7. He says we're at more like 15% inflation if we calculated it the same way we did back in the 70s and 80s. So that's crazy. And raising interest rates 1% isn't going to fix that. So, but I don't know how old you are, Martha, if I assume that you're a kindred spirit and you're about the same age I am, and I'm an older dude. I remember when interest rates for a loan were at 13%, 12%, 11% to buy a house. So your home loan was 13%. I remember in the early 90s when it dropped below 10% and everyone went nuts buying houses because they thought they'd never see rates at 9% again. Everybody today is very much not in that mindset, right? We've had low interest rates for so long that people think that's normal, and it's not. 10% interest on a mortgage is extremely normal. So we'll have to see what happens. There's a bunch of we've got the thing with Russia and the Ukraine. Big wars always cause chaos in a lot of different marketplaces, particularly when this is a marketplace about oil, right? I mean, you really just follow the money on this stuff. There's no weird, we're trying to liberate ethnic Russians from the Ukraine here. There's none of that. It's because the Ukraine was about to become a huge competitor of Russia's in terms of selling gas, natural gas and oil, right? I don't think it's a coincidence that the places that Russia invaded as fast as their little feet would carry them were the oil fields of the Ukraine. So not only are we dealing with just the general war causes havoc stuff, we're dealing with the huge oil, natural gas market stuff that also comes into that, which then feeds how much we're paying for a gallon of gas here, which then feeds how much that bottle of whatever, that bread or bottle of wine or whatever you're going to buy, how much that ends up costing you, because those costs are all integrated with each other. However, given the numbers we've looked at today and how inflation tends to affect home prices, if we go ahead and buy into the idea that we're at about those levels that we were in the 70s, I would say a near-term increase. In fact, let's look at that chart again, just so I can show you. If we hang all of our expectations on this, right? There's the number. So we're way over here. If we believe that we are in crazy inflation, we can see that as we've done this rise, home values have gone up just like they did in the late 70s. But the home value increase tends to stall before inflation peaks, right? And if we believe we're not at a peak of our current level of inflation, which I don't think we are, I think inflation is going to go more up bad. I would expect to see a downturn as that happens in home prices. But remember, this is an average across the country. If we start talking about Salinas and we start talking about San Jose and we start talking about Morgan Hill, maybe this graph doesn't dip as dramatically, but maybe it goes down a little bit and stays flat for a lot longer, right? Because we live in a funky market compared to the rest of the country. So sadly, I can't give you a straight up answer. I can say I think that within the next 2 years, we will see flattening, if not outright decreases in many markets. And it's also the other part of this that's interesting is the whole working from home thing, right? Is that a fad or is that going to stick? Are we going to see people able to work from home in the long term so that literally where people want to live has changed as a long-term effect of real estate? Because that's one of the reasons why Salinas has become what it's become in terms of increased prices. That's why Tracy, that's why all these other places that are outlying communities have seen increases. That's why suddenly places out in the middle of nowhere in Utah and Idaho and everywhere else are seeing increases in values because people are moving from places like San Jose, San Francisco, Sunnyvale, Los Gatos, LA to these other areas because they can live there, right? Particularly programmers. Programming is an excellent example of that, where you really don't need to physically be there to be a programmer. And obviously that's a thing here in my marketplace, here in Silicon Valley, where so much of that happens. And particularly when employers discover they can actually save a ton of money by having people work remotely. If that becomes a much more influential thing, that shifts where these values end up being adjusted based on demand, because the demand is increased in these areas that typically were of lower demand. But if that's not a permanent thing, right? If your company embraced the work from home thing because COVID, and then have decided, you know what, this doesn't work for us, and they start bringing people back in, then if that happens broadly, that changes the dynamic, right? That changes the flow of where people will be living. And I'll tell you what, I've talked to a few folks who work for major corporations. We're talking Fortune 20 corporations who are all in on this whole work from home thing. And now, as we're starting to exit, they're sort of pulling back on that a bit for a variety of reasons. Everything from, we own this giant building and no one's in it, to there are certain agreements we've made with local government relating to how many butts we have in seats. We get a huge break tax-wise from the local city, and we don't get that and it was predicated on us having a certain amount of employees on site. There's a lot of stupid, weird things that you wouldn't think would influence this that do. And obviously that's not going to be every corporation. You know, the mom and pop place, or the smaller corporation, or the business that's got less than 1,000 employees. You know, odds are that's not going to be a dynamic that affects them, and they may be more willing to embrace the whole work from home thing. But your giant corporations that have like a national footprint, I'm hearing from those folks more of that kind of stuff, more of the weird reasons why they are starting to back off of doing work from home stuff. All right, let me go back to the magical internet and see if there's any other amazing stories that we want to cover today. So that was the one about the whole heating bills thing. There was a couple of other articles. Let's see here. There was one about inflation in general. This guy is not a happy person in terms of telling us about what inflation is going to happen. Inflation is busting out. 7.9% claimed as the current U.S. yearly rate of inflation is but a minimum bid in the true reality. Let's see. Various powers that be are busy pointing fingers of blame for these horrendous inflation readings in every direction, but the right one at themselves, and they're more focused on blaming others instead of fixing the problem. And that's kind of what concerns me. I feel like the folks in charge right now are sort of picking around the edges of inflation rather than really jumping in and figuring out what causes the problem. But that's an interesting one if you want to check that story out. What else? You know what? There were a couple of realtor stories that I thought were interesting. This is one we talked about before. So, Martha, you won't remember this because this is your first time with us. But a few coffee and real estates back, I talked about love letters. We'll go ahead and finish with this since we've hit the 11 o'clock hour. But love letters are what buyers write to sellers when they submit their offer. It's a way to try to connect personally with the seller. And Oregon had passed a law to outlaw them, which I thought was a bit of overreach. How someone can think they can sell someone else. They're not allowed to send a letter along with an offer. Seems like the height of things we shouldn't let the government tell us we can't do. It's totally up to the seller whether or not they read it. So you, as a listing agent or as a seller, you can say, I don't even want to see them. I want this to be about the numbers, and I don't want to become personally connected with these buyers, right? And that's fine. But the whole idea was they were doing it based on this misplaced assumption that it would introduce bias. Okay, I get it. However, as a guy who has represented an awful lot of buyers and helped an awful lot of buyers successfully get their offer accepted, even when they weren't the best offer, it's about reading the room, people. For all you real estate agents out there who have a boilerplate that you use for your love letter, you're not doing your job. And if you are a buyer and you're working with an agent, make sure that you are reading that letter. Because here's the deal. Yes, is there bias out there in the world? Absolutely. However, you as a buyer or an agent walking through a house should get a pretty good idea about what that seller is into, right? You're seeing their photos. You're seeing the books that they have on their shelves. You're seeing whatever they've got around. If it's a lot of religious icons, or if it's tons of Disney tchotchkes, if they have huge collector chests filled with every Disney princess, right? You're learning things about that seller. So am I going to go in and just do a shotgun approach and try to hit every note with a love letter to a seller? No, that's a rookie move, because you're just as likely to piss off a seller as you are to ingratiate yourself with them. And because the intent of a love letter is to make an emotional appeal, if you don't strike the right emotional note, it's going to have just as much of a possibility of turning off that seller as it is of turning them on to your client. But whether you as the buyer or your client if you're the agent. So, there are an awful lot of dynamics there. I guess they were thinking about the race thing, and I guess that's a thing. I suppose it is in some cases. And if that is a thing that is a concern, well, then absolutely don't make that something that's in the letter, right? But I go back to a year ago, and I've had a couple since where I still feel like my love letter was pretty awesome. Maybe that's a vanity, me thinking my love letters are awesome, but I have no doubt in my mind that the folks who I helped buy a house this time last year, it was 80%, 90% because of the love letter, because we were not the highest offer. We did not offer the best terms, but we got the house. And it was because we walked through that house and found points of commonality between my buyer and these sellers, clearly commonality because of the stuff they had in their house. And when we pointed that stuff out, we got put in the first chair. That's what it's about. It's about paying attention, right? It's about paying attention and using the details to your advantage when you can. All right. It's about 5 minutes after. I really appreciate you coming by, Martha. I hope we were able to answer some questions. I'm sad I wasn't able to answer your when will house prices go down question. Will they go down? Yeah. But that's an easy one, right? On a long enough timeline, everything is true, right? So eventually home prices are going to go down. It's just a question of knowing when. In the near term, I think that they're going to stagnate a bit and flatten. With interest rates continuing to go up on lending, but that it's all about that inventory number. If we start to see headlines talking about a decrease in buyers and we start to see homes staying on the market longer, I think if sellers start to feel like that market's starting to make its turn, I think you'll see a rush of sellers go into the market to try to pull out the profit while they can. But it's going to take something that's pretty. It's not. It can't be subtle, right? It's got to be a big headline. It's got to be something that's being pushed out everywhere, where sellers are getting the idea that they've reached the peak. And if they were going to sell in a year or two, maybe they accelerate those plans because they won't get as much in a year or two, is the concern. Right now, I'm not talking to anybody who thinks that their home's going to be worth the same or less in a year than it is now. Nobody who I'm talking to do market analysis for their properties or anything like that are thinking that way. So clearly that message isn't happening right now. But I think things could at least flatten, and in a longer timeline, like a 2-year timeline, we could start to see those prices dip. But and in real estate isn't always on its way up. It tends to recover and then start going up again. But it does have its moments when it goes down. So I think it'll absolutely happen. All right. Well, I think that about covers it. I appreciate Martha coming by and spending some time with me, and the rest of you who showed up here for a little bit to check in on what's going on with the numbers. Appreciate it. If you would like to have some get some questions answered as Martha did, or you would like to suggest some topics, feel free to reach out to me. My website is soldbyrobert.com. I'm a real estate broker right here in Morgan Hill, California, and I serve southern San Jose down to Gilroy, and I like Salinas. I'm glad it was helpful, Martha. And so if someone needed some help in Salinas, I think that'd be something I'd consider. But I hope this has been good for everybody. We covered some interesting stuff. So once again, this will be happening on the third Saturday of every month. It has been for a while now, but I'd love to see all of you out here again next month, where we'll cover what has gone on in the month of March and whatever other awesome news items have come up in the world of real estate. Thanks again, and I will see you guys next time. Enjoy your coffee.